"You need to move out," my sister Amanda had said, her voice carrying the absolute certainty of someone who'd already made up her mind and was simply announcing it rather than discussing it. I was sitting in the kitchen of the house we'd inherited together from our mother. A split 50-50 ownership that I'd thought meant we were partners in this asset, when she delivered that sentence like it was both obvious and inevitable. "Your freelance thing isn't stable enough," she'd continued, and I could see the calculation behind her eyes. How to position this as practical rather than cruel. "We need someone with a real income to carry the mortgage. We need someone who can guarantee they won't default." The irony was that I'd spent the last 4 years making sure the mortgage got paid while she spent her money on things that made her feel successful. 3 years later, I stood in a real estate attorney's office in downtown Portland and watched myself become the owner of the entire mixed-use development. The building that had started as just our childhood home and had somehow, through a series of investments and strategic acquisitions, become a 6-story structure worth $47 million. And my sister had just received an eviction notice. The house we inherited had been in our family for 60 years. It was a beautiful Victorian in northwest Portland, 4 stories, originally built as a single-family home but converted to a duplex in the 1990s when my parents had rented out the top 2 floors. My mother had passed it to us with the expectation that we'd maintain it as a family asset. Both Amanda and I had inherited it equally. The problem was that Amanda wanted to cash out. "It's too much responsibility," she'd said 6 months after Mom's funeral. "I don't want to be a landlord. I don't want to deal with tenant issues. I want to liquidate and split the proceeds. You can buy my half if you want to keep it." I didn't have the money to buy her out. My income was unstable by conventional standards. I was a freelance user experience designer, doing contract work with tech companies, creative agencies, and startups. Some months I made $40,000. Some months I made $8,000. By traditional banking metrics, I was unemployable. But I also knew something Amanda didn't. The Portland real estate market was about to explode. "Give me a year," I'd asked her. "Let me try to refinance. Let me see if I can make this work." She'd reluctantly agreed. And then she'd moved back into the house we both owned, while I was renting an apartment 2 blocks away. She'd decided to live off her savings while she figured things out. She'd made no mortgage payments. She'd made no property tax contributions. She'd lived in the building we owned together while doing absolutely nothing to maintain it. After about 14 months of this, her savings had run low. Her patience with my unstable income had evaporated. And she'd decided that the solution was to have me move back in and subsidize her entirely. "You'll move into the basement apartment," she'd announced. "You'll pay rent to both of us. Well, we'll structure it as a payment toward your buyout of my half. This way you're helping with the mortgage, and I'm getting closer to my exit." I'd agreed because I didn't see another option. I'd moved back into the basement of the house where I'd grown up, paying rent to my sister while she lived in the upstairs apartment I'd designed. And for 6 months, this had worked after a fashion. Then Amanda had met Derek. Derek was an investment banker who made excellent money and had very clear opinions about what constituted a real job. He'd moved in with Amanda. He'd looked at the property with his banker's eye and determined that we were sitting on real estate that should be monetized more aggressively. "This building is being underutilized," he'd said at dinner one night. "You could convert it to professional office space. You could rent every square foot to small businesses. The neighborhood gentrification is going to make this worth 3 times what it's worth now." Amanda had loved this idea, and she'd decided, in the way that siblings with competing interests sometimes do, that the fastest way to implement it was to remove me from the equation. "You need to move out," she'd said the night Derek had stayed over for the first time. They'd sat at the kitchen table, the kitchen I was paying half the utilities for, and delivered this ultimatum with the casual certainty of people who'd already decided this was reasonable. "Your freelance thing isn't stable enough. We're going to do a major renovation and conversion. We need someone with a real income to guarantee they won't default on the property taxes or maintenance costs." Translation: "You're in the way of what we want to do." "I own half of this property," I'd said quietly. "Exactly," Amanda had replied. "Which is why we should buy out your half and get you out cleanly. We'll have it appraised. You'll get your 50% of the value. Everyone wins." But the property hadn't been appraised. Instead, she'd simply unilaterally decided I needed to leave. She'd cited property tax concerns and mortgage stability. She'd suggested that my freelance income was putting the entire investment at risk. She'd made it clear that either I signed over my half of the property or I needed to vacate immediately. I'd packed that weekend. Moving out had been devastating and clarifying in equal measure. I'd rented a small apartment and sat with what had just happened. My sister had essentially stolen my half of a major asset. Not through legal mechanisms. She hadn't tried to force a sale or go through proper channels. She'd just used shame and pressure to make me feel like I needed to leave. And I'd left. But sitting in that apartment, I'd started doing the math. The property was worth approximately $2.8 million at current market value. My half was $1.4 million. I didn't have $1.4 million. But I did have something else. I understood the Portland real estate market. I understood property development. I understood how to identify underutilized assets and maximize their potential. I'd gotten very quiet and very strategic. My first move was to hire a real estate attorney. I needed to understand my legal position. I still owned half of that property. Amanda couldn't just force me out without legal consequences. The attorney explained that I had options. I could force a sale, demand a buyout, take her to court for half the value of any improvements she made. But all of those options were adversarial and would take years. Instead, I'd asked, what if I wanted to buy her out? You'd need to either come up with $1.4 million or take out a loan for that amount, the attorney had said. Banks typically require that you prove income stability. Given your freelance status, that might be challenging. That's when I'd made a decision that changed everything. I stopped freelancing. Instead, I'd taken a full-time position at a tech company as their director of user experience. The salary was $180,000 annually, less than I'd made in some of my freelance years, but consistent and verifiable. It was the kind of income that banks understood. The kind of income that made you eligible for loans. For the next 18 months, I worked that job while secretly building a plan to acquire the entire property. I'd saved every penny beyond my living expenses. I'd gotten pre-approved for a mortgage. I'd contacted Amanda about buying her out. We'd need to get it appraised, she'd said, which meant she was seriously considering it. The appraisal came back at $3.2 million. My half, $1.6 million. I'd made a formal offer of $1.55 million, and Amanda had accepted. I'd taken out a loan, paid her off, and suddenly I owned the entire 4-story Victorian outright. That was when things had gotten interesting. With full ownership, I'd been able to execute a vision that Amanda and Derek had been suggesting, but would have never actually implemented well. I'd hired architects and contractors. I'd converted the building from a duplex into a mixed-use property. Professional office space on the first 2 floors, residential units above. I'd marketed the office space to tech companies, design firms, and creative agencies. I'd renovated the residential units and rented them at premium prices to young professionals who wanted to live in trendy Northwest Portland. Within 2 years, the property was generating $180,000 monthly in rental income. Within 3 years, I'd used the equity from this building to acquire 2 adjacent properties. I'd converted those into more mixed-use developments. I'd built a real estate portfolio that was actually worth something. By year 4, I owned a $47 million mixed-use development that included my original family home, plus 5 additional buildings that I'd acquired through strategic purchases and renovations. And I'd done it without a single dollar from Amanda, without her input, without her agreement. That was when Derek had contacted me. We'd like to discuss a potential partnership, his email had said. Amanda and I believe there could be tremendous synergy between our financial expertise and your real estate vision. We'd be interested in investing in your next development. I deleted it. 6 months later, the property management company had discovered that Amanda was living in one of my residential units, a $3,200 per month apartment that I'd been renting through my property management company. She'd been paying rent for 2 years without realizing that she was essentially paying my mortgage. When the lease came up for renewal, I'd chosen not to renew it. The property management company had sent the formal eviction notice. She'd called me immediately. "You can't evict me," she'd said. "I'm your sister." "I can," I'd replied calmly. "And I am. You chose to stop being family when you decided to steal my half of the property. You chose to be a tenant when you moved into one of my buildings. Tenants who don't renew their leases get evicted." "This is vindictive," she'd said. "No," I'd corrected. "This is consequences. You made a choice based on how much money I was making and whether you thought my job was legitimate. I'm making a choice based on the fact that you stopped being someone I want to do business with. The real estate attorney's office, where I'd signed the final papers for the $47 million development, had been quiet and professional. No one had been there to congratulate me. Amanda had been too busy arranging to move out of my building. My other family members didn't know about any of this. It was just me, my attorney, and the closing documents. But as I'd signed my name on page after page, I'd thought about something important. The victory wasn't in owning the building. The victory was in realizing that I'd never needed my sister's approval, my family's validation, or anyone else's belief in my career to become successful. I'd needed to become so successful that her disrespect became irrelevant. The building was the physical manifestation of that irrelevance. 2 years after Amanda moved out, I'd been featured in the Portland Business Journal as one of the city's most successful real estate developers under 40. The article mentioned my background in UX design and how I'd applied that thinking to property development. It mentioned my portfolio of mixed-use buildings. It mentioned my $47 million development. It did not mention Amanda. She'd read the article. She'd called me afterward. "I saw the feature," she'd said. "You've done something remarkable." "Yes," I'd agreed. "I have. I'm sorry for how I treated you. I should have believed in you. I should have." "Amanda," I'd interrupted, "I don't need your apology. Your apology doesn't change what happened. It doesn't change the fact that I had to become undeniably successful for you to finally respect me. And I don't actually need your respect anymore. So your apology is too late." She'd been quiet for a moment. "Will you ever forgive me?" "I already have," I'd said. "But forgiveness doesn't mean we go back to being siblings who share assets. Forgiveness just means I'm not angry anymore. I'm free. And that's what matters." I'd hung up after that. Sometimes the most powerful victory isn't proving someone wrong. It's simply making their approval completely irrelevant to your life.